water there if you want it.
Lovely, thank you. Thanks. I hope everybody can hear me okay. Yep, good. Super, there we go, that's the first slide up. Now, before I begin, simple question, who's ever heard of a Galloway horse or a Galloway nag? One or two. It's surprising how many people have never heard of it. And I call it the most influential horse in the world that nobody's ever heard of, because that is, in effect, what it is. And by the end of the evening, I hope you'll agree with me that the Galloway nag or Galloway horse deserves to be much better known. That's okay. So that's fine, lovely. My entry into the world of Galloway Nag studies, which is a very small field, I am the only person in it. It comes about because I'm from Newcastle in northeast England, you probably guessed. I'm not from Scotland, though I've lived in Scotland for over 25 years now. In the north of England, various places, if you go there, you will find that people call horses Gallowers. Amongst the mining community, upland farmers, travelling people, we call horses Gallowers. So this was my start as a child. This is literally a lifelong study for me. Why do we call them Gallowers? And literally decades later, I can tell you exactly why we call them Gallowers. If I can get the switch to work. I think I'm going the wrong way. That's it. So this is a bit of a spoiler alert, because we call them Gallowers because a horse between 13 and 14 hands in height is called a Galloway, from a beautiful breed of little horses once found in the south of Scotland on the shore of the Solway Firth, but now sadly degenerated and almost lost. He's wrong and he's right, by the way. The pure Galloway was said to be nearly 14 hands high and sometimes more, of a bright bay or brown, with black legs, small head and neck, and peculiarly deep and clean legs. Its qualities were speed, stoutness, and sure-footedness over a very rugged and mountainous country. That's William Hewitt. He was a very prolific writer of the 19th century. Lots of books on animal husbandry. They were republished and published again and copied and plagiarized. And he was writing in the middle of the 19th century, and that was the state as he saw it of the Galloway. That there really, were there any or weren't there any? If there were any, they really weren't what people had originally considered them to be. And this is where my biggest problem comes in. I can't show you a picture of a Galloway nag. That is the best thing I can do. The drawing that accompanied his comments on the Galloway nag there. So it's a very kind of romantic view, but I will be able to show you what I think a Galloway nag looked like later in the talk. Okay, now I don't have to show you this map. I always put it in because obviously lots of places where I give a talk, I need to explain to them about the country, the terrain, the places that are really important. But of course you don't need to know this, you are already ahead of the game. But I just want to point out two things. New Galloway, obviously, that's really what we think of as the heartland of the Galloway nag. Although Hewitt said on the shores of the Solway Firth, that's a wee bit romantic, more likely up in the hills around New Galloway. But Kirkcudbright is very important because there would have been shipping of horses going on from here. So it's massively, massively important. And as you are all historians, if you come across horse shipping documentation, please let me know, because this is another area that I really need to get into. I also wanted to point out Kelton Hill, the site of a very important horse fair that was attended not just by people in the local area, but by people from all over Scotland and beyond Scotland as well. So Kelton Hill is very important. And apparently it's still a local saying in Dumfriesshire, which is something like, it's a proper Kelton Hill in here, or this place is like a proper Kelton Hill, because being a horse fair, being a fair, there's lots going on, there's lots of drinking, gambling, horse racing, having fun. And so apparently, I think you had the lady from Dumfries Archives over a few, she informed me that she was used to her family saying it's a proper Celtic hill. Okay, right, there we go. This one is to show you how we think of this part of Scotland where the Galloway Nags come from, that rather than view it as has been viewed historically as a kind of a bit of Scotland that's a bit strange and sticks out and isn't really quite Scottish, so like the rest of the mainland, if we see it as part of those sea kingdoms going over to the north of Ireland, up the west coast, down to Cumbria, it makes kind of more sense. That it's not an isolated part of Scotland, it's part of another region that is really sea, focuses on the sea. So that too is very important. I think I say this because I think people think like, how could Galloway, of this remote place, have ever produced horses of quality? And I've had people to try to use arguments with me, like they were imported horses from Spain, they came off the Spanish Armada. That story's been very well debunked. It's like the people of this region were very, very capable of raising excellent horses, going back a long way in time. We don't really need to look for something coming from outside for quality. Let's get the Galloway Nag thing out of the way right at the start. So this word nag, does this reflect poor quality in a horse? Because, you know, a lot of people say, why do you call it a nag? I'm trying to reinstate nag as a good word for a horse, not a negative word. It's become negative, but if you look at the Dictionary of the Old Scottish Tongue, it's just all variants such as naig and naggy and nag, a small horse, a pony. It's just a little riding horse, basically. There's nothing negative about it. It's sometimes applied negatively, but that wasn't really the case in Scotland or the north of England. It's derived probably from verbs to neigh. So that's what a nag is. It's the animal that neighs, simple as that. And when you think of the Scots terms, naig and naiggy, it sounds much more like neighing than nag does. So use the term Galloway Nag with pride. I don't have a problem with it at all. I want to go way back to look for possible origins of the Galloway Nag, way back into the pre-Roman period. So I'll take you quickly through the history of looking at potential origins of the land race. We call it a land race rather than a breed. It was never a breed. Breeds are very much a creation of the 18th and 19th century, beginning with the general stud book for thoroughbreds. This kind of setting up of a standard and registering, people didn't really do that. So, but we do call a very popular type of animal within a certain region a land race before the days of the documentation. Plenty of evidence to show it was a land race. Horses in Bronze Age Scotland, around 1000 BC. This is a fantastic new development of some chariot harness that's been discovered in Borders region. This happened while I was doing the PhD. And I am just desperate to know whether anybody's taken this further. Nothing appears to have happened on it. But this tells us that way, way back in Scotland, if you look at, I used to, as you said, they've be an Egyptologist, and the ancient Egyptians got chariots in about 1600 BCE. So there's not a huge gap in time between chariotry in Scotland and chariotry in ancient Egypt. I think it's really important to point that out. People think of ancient Egypt as being a very highly developed place. It was, but there's not a huge gap there. That's the oldest we've got so far. Now, the Tor's pony cap, we're jumping forward in time now to the Iron Age. I think plenty of you will be aware of this artifact, yes? Yeah. Now in National Museums of Scotland. It used to sit on Walter Scott's desk, so it's got this fantastic connection to Scotland's literary history as well. It is a cap. It fits over the head. It's not a chamfrain, as it's sometimes described, but would have fitted small ponies, maybe about 12 hands. A hand is 4 inches. A colleague of mine has examined this piece. She says it was not just a piece for prestige or for a funerary item or something. It's been well used and it's been repaired. This is Dr. Rena Maguire. that I work with quite a lot on various projects, and she's very active. She's at Dublin University in projects there. So we can see that even at this point, horses are very important. They're prestige animals. They're part of this wider world of art and artistry and connection. But we can't really call them a Galloway nag yet, not strictly speaking, because the term Galloway doesn't come in until much later on. But they're Galloways to me, you know. Now I want to show you this column base from Maryport in Cumbria, which shows the goddess Epona. I think some of you will have heard of her. Very important in Roman and pre-Roman times. We assume in pre-Roman times amongst the people of Europe as the mother of the mares, guardian of the horse herds, and a deity to whom the Roman army paid a great deal of respect. I like this one because, I don't know if you can see this, they've got the legs wrong on the drawing, but the legs are correct on the actual, I'm wondering if I can actually show you this on the, I need a little pointer really. The horse is gaited. For those of you, how many of you actually are horsey people? You know, oh, yeah, a few. You'll know about walk, trot and canter. I think most people have heard of walk, trot, canter and gallop. Horses can move in many other ways. There's like over 100 ways a quadruped can move. But we think of these kind of three gaits, walk, trot, canter with gallop, as the way a horse moves. One of the ways that they move, and the popular riding horses used to move in medieval and early modern times, was laterally. The legs on each side come forward together as a pair, or as a 1-2 beat. 1-2, 1-2, 1-2, 1-2, 1-2, 1-2. That's a lateral movement. Very, very comfortable. You'll be able to actually see this at the end of the talk. That is a lateral horse. The horse is moving laterally. Very important, because that's what the Galloways were famous for, their comfortable lateral movements. Hilton of Cadwallstone, still can't call it a Galloway nag. We can call them Pictish horses, but if you look closely, you'll see that some of those horses on the Hilton of Cadwall, so-called Pictish stone, are gaited as well. I am prepared to, hill I'm going to die on, these are ancestors of the Galloway nag. Okay, I can't prove it, but I'm sure they are. Right, so I've tried to highlight that for you there to show the lateral movement. If it's a trot, it would be a diagonal. I think I'm going to have to just reach across the floor here and kind of do a pointy thing. You can see that this leg, that leg, that's probably an easier one, the one at the top there. Those two legs on one side are forward. The two legs on the other side are not. So it's a lateral movement. It's not like a trot where you've got a diagonal movement. Okay, again, as I say, you'll be able to see this a bit better at the end of the talk. Enter William the Lion and Fergus of Galloway. How many of you have ever heard of the famous Fergus of Galloway? Yeah, a version of Fergus of Galloway, basically, in a French tale, probably written for the court of William the Lion. And in this story, he's got this fantastic, his father gives him a wonderful horse. You may, and this is what Guillaume Leclerc said about 1200, you may know for a fact that it is the way of many horses in that country, that they run more swiftly over quaking bog than any man could go on foot. So around 1200, the horses of the region of Galloway are already famous for their smooth movement. Jumping on much later in time to Walter Scott, he led a small and shaggy nag that through a bog from hag to hag could bound like any billop stag. It's still important. Centuries later, the little horses of Scotland are still very important for their ability to run over boggy ground. Okay, Robert Bruce. At Bannockburn, again, some of you may have heard the Bower story, where or read the Bower story, that he was mounted on a little palfrey, locht and jolly around, his batail with an axe in hand. He's wearing a head covering, a crown, and he's got also a helmet on. And here he is going in on a tiny horse under the knight, and he did with a backswing, he just whops off his head. I'm trying to remember whether it was Umfraville or one of the others. Anyway, quite a famous story, and it's in Bower. And of course, lots of people have said, it was a Galloway nag. You know, can't prove it, but it again goes to show that these little light horses were really important. And you don't need a big horse. The Scots did a lot better in Scotland with the little horses, because the English needed to find more fodder for their slightly larger horses. They weren't giant horses like you sometimes see in the movies, but they were somewhat bigger than the Scottish horses, and they needed better care. And that was a bit of a problem in Scotland, because one of the things that the Scottish horses were famous for was being good, what we call good doers. They didn't need a lot of feed. You could turn them out for a couple of hours and then get on them and ride away again. This comes up again and again. So not a Galloway nag, but something like it. Froissart and Lebel mentioned the Petit Hackney to Scotland, and when there were later translations of this, they were translated in French documents of the 19th century as Galloways. Okay, that's not what it said in the original, but everybody, you can see, has got this idea that Galloways are something special, that Galloways are what ordinary people in Scotland and sometimes knights rode. You also find references to equus gradarii, ambling nags, and again, that's used particularly in association with horses from Galloway. Bishop Leslie, 1561, he said, "Our whole country, our hail country through, bringeth up ambling horse, then chiefly Galloway, that all others they excel. I say, they others excel, they many days' journey. They are so swift in body, albeit they be small." So the horses of Galloway are famous. Now I can really talk about a Galloway nag. After an important meeting in London between the Archbishop of St Andrews and the Archbishop of Canterbury, they were talking about who was going to take over when Elizabeth died. That's what it was basically about. A very, very important diplomatic mission. Adamson said to Whitgift, "I'll send you, if you lend me a horse to get home on," because he'd sold all his. Archbishop Patrick Adamson got up to something in London, I've no idea what, but somehow or other he didn't have any horses to go home on. I've no idea what you do there. But he said, "Lend me one of your horses to go home on." Whitgift was an archbishop who had a massive amount of really good quality horses himself. And Adamson said, "If you let me go home on one of yours, an ambling nag, please, I'll send you a better one, a Galloway nag." And very soon, a lot of the English were in agreement that the best ambling nags on the island of Britain were Galloways. One of the things that the Galloways have become very connected to the border reivers. There's not actually a huge amount of evidence. The things like the border ballads and the documentation, the border records, they don't talk about Galloway. They talk about nags, but not specifically Galloways. Michael Drayton said on his match as much the Western horsemen, that's southwest England, lays as the rank riding Scots upon their Galloways. So he was aware that Galloways were fast, used for racing. And in a little note on the side, he said, "Galloways are the best kind of Scottish nags." The Duke of Newcastle said exactly the same thing. He said the best nags, and he was no mean horseman. He said the best nags in Scotland are the Galloways. Now, why does it not turn up in Scottish documentation? Having sort of examined the evidence, I've come to the conclusion that one reason might be that the main producers of the Galloways in Scotland were Gaelic speakers. And that's why it's kind of slipped through the cracks in Scottish documentation, but it's used widely on the English side. There's a place called Ballygarran in Glen Kens, farm of the geldings. The Scots were producing massive numbers of horses. I can't really kind of explain to you how big the horse population of Scotland was. It was huge. And a lot of those geldings, I'm sure, there was horses for the riding horse market, were not only being sent to England, but also abroad to Europe. I've got evidence that they were going to Spain and Italy as well. And they were very, very fast. This is what's very important about them. And in fact, I'll have some more to say on that later on. I have also identified that for over a century, the English used the Galloway nag as a satirical reference for the Scots and Scotland. It begins with William Shakespeare, "No, we're not Galloway nags." I could probably do you a talk just on this alone, but I'm just going to kind of briefly go through it. It carries on in Ben Jonson, "How now my Galloway nag the staggers." I think that's a pointed dig at James VI and first. I've written papers on this, and if you want copies, I'm happy to send them to you. "Ride thither on thy Galloway nag, or else thy jennet." That's Thomas Dekker when he's telling young men what are the best horses to ride. He says a Galloway nag or a jennet. If you want to get round town in a hurry, from like pub to pub, basically, a seedy place to seedy place, you need a young man needs a fast horse like a Galloway nag or a jennet. And it turns up I've identified a major poem about the Galloway nag by John Taylor. It's in Andrew Marvell's A Loyal Scot, and Marchmont Needham, who was an excoriating writer on Covenanters and Presbyterians. It was used, first of all, to identify the Stuarts and their courtiers, and then later on to identify Scots more generally, and specifically Presbyterians and Covenanters, which, I bet a lot of you are aware of Covenanting history. They were not popular in London at the end of the 17th century. And Marchmont Needham's saying they come down here on the Galloway nags and they want to get their feet under the table. And he's just really excoriating. But they also appear in atlases and travels books as one of Galloway's most important and best known assets. Oh yeah, everybody knows Galloway. It's the place where the fantastic little horses come from. They know them as far away as Spain. They know them as far away as Italy. Yeah. So, and it's so interesting it's been forgotten. The cartoon is of Earl Galloway in the early 1800s, and it's supposed to be Earl Galloway on his Galloway nag. He was the Tory MP for Morpeth. So it's a kind of a late example of satire, but I've discovered a lot of it, basically. So not only in Scotland's a very important place for raising horses. Galloway is particularly important because the quality of Galloways is better than all the other horses in Scotland. Lots of people agree on that. Why? I want to sort of pause a minute and think why Galloway and Scotland were so important for horses. Good grazing, good unimproved grazing, and good fresh clean water. You could turn them out on the hills and they would look after themselves, and you'd bring them in from the hills. You'd just go and catch a few whenever you wanted them, take them to the fair if you wanted to sell them, ride them yourself. You know, fantastic. They're out there. They're part of the landscape. Natural selection through the rigors of the climate and landscape made them really tough and hardy, and human intervention through gelding, choosing the best ones to breed from and gelding the others. There was a focus in Scotland on hardiness, speed, endurance, utility and comfort, not size. Size didn't matter. It was the other things that were really important. And there are lots of disadvantages in keeping larger horses. They need more food, they cut the land up, all sorts of issues in keeping large horses. So the focus is on multi-purpose utility in small animals and the sheer number. James IV was said to be able to raise 100,000 horses in 30 days. And I think the comment was, and it doesn't include the horses from the islands. That was a Portuguese commentator who was in Scotland. So think of the horse trade as massive in Scotland and really, really important. So as late as 1729, they're still riding fairly high, even though all sorts of things are happening to horses and horse breeds are changing. Would you pronounce that? That would be Mackay rather than Mackie, yeah? Mackay. Alexander Mackay of Palgoon, who hath a very commodious and romantic seat on Lake Loch Truel in a valley environed with mountains in the north and east of a mile high. He keeps at least 10,000 sheep in these mountains, besides an incredible number of black cattle and wild horses called Galloways, and is one of the greatest graziers in Britain and has vast parks and enclosures. So still, again, even that late, Galloways are very important. And the Galloways are tied up very closely in the whole Jacobite story, which is quite a complicated tale. But it's part of the reason for their decline, their disappearance from sight, part of it. More examples from the 18th century. So you really see things changing around about the time of Culloden. Daniel Defoe, 1720s, was also in Scotland promoting the Unionist side. And he said in Galloway, they have the best breed of strong, low horses in Britain, if not in Europe, which we call pads, and from whence we call all small, strong horses Galloways. This is what the English do now. They describe these horses Galloways. This is why I, growing up in Newcastle, and the people I knew, my mining relatives and people in hill farms and so forth, still use the word Gallower, because once upon a time, everybody in England used the word Gallower to describe horses. I hope you're all getting a bit shocked by this and wondering, well, why the heck this horse isn't better known? It's really, really important. So on the other side of the argument, from the Unionist side, we've got John Sproul, who's a merchant, a Covenanter, who was imprisoned on the Bass Rock for quite a long time. And he sells Galloways, and he says, the borderers on both Scots and English side came off to Dumbarton Fair. When I had some Scots Galloways, it was coveted and often bought from me. And I can aver as a truth, a Scots Galloway of 40 or 50 shillings sterling per piece will ride farther and kill, beat and founder an English gelding that costs 20, 30, 40 or 50 pounds sterling. So you can pay 50 shillings for a Scottish gelding, and it's better than an English, it's better quality than an English gelding that might cost you 50 pounds, you know, is what he's saying. Okay, he's in the market, he's selling them, but still, you know, this ties in with what other people say about the quality of the geldings. If they continue long, I know them ride 40 or 50 miles a day, and then they are kept easily and can feed upon the orts of others. The orts of others is whatever the other horses reject, they'll eat and they'll live on. Good doers. And he was also shipping Galloways to Suriname to work in the plantations there. Stoned horses and mares, that means stallions. So there's clearly a breeding program going on in the Americas to produce Galloways for the plantations. And they are a big part of the foundation stock for the American gaited horses. Lots of people are aware of this in America, some are, some aren't. But they were definitely through a breed of horse, the Americans' first breed of horse, called the Narragansett Pacer. That had Galloway stock in it. I'm not named out about that. But by the 1790s, the statistical accounts are saying the little Galloways are all worn out. There's this sense of kind of nostalgia. And all the big horses now are, you know, they're bringing in big horses for farming. And there's some commentators, fabulous source, the statistical accounts, absolutely wonderful. Some of them are like, they're all worn out. These are our traditional horses. They're the old horses of the island of Britain, and they're just disappearing. And others are going, aren't these new horses, great big horses, fabulous? Aren't our landowners that are breeding these great big horses, aren't they wonderful? I'm so happy to have them. So there's a really mixed bag of attitudes towards horses in Scotland at this point, and in southwest Scotland in particular. Now, the Galloway hasn't disappeared. This is the important thing to say. Well, I can't take you out and show you the little bay horses with the black legs in the hills in Galloway any longer, because they aren't there. But the genes live on in a surprising number of horse breeds that you will possibly recognise. On the left, we have a fell pony. I've deliberately chosen horses that match Ewett's description a bit that we saw at the start. So on the left we have a bay fell pony with red bay fell pony with black legs. On the right we have a Newfoundland pony bay with black legs. So you can see that there are still little bay horses, descendants of the Galloway, around. These are the two of the horse breeds that people reckon to be most closely related to the Galloway. Now, two that might surprise you, the Clydesdale and the Thoroughbred. The Clydesdale was bred, the Dukes of Hamilton had a big hand in breeding the Clydesdale. But you will find in the records it says that they were breeding the stock from Galloway mares. Sure, they were importing big stallions from England and the continent, but the mare stock they were using was Galloway's. So much so that at one point in the 19th century, they were called Galloway Clydesdales. So people knew that the old multi-purpose stock was still there in the Clydesdale breed. Now on the right, this is a fascinating story. I could do you a talk on just the Galloway influence in the Thoroughbred. Galloway's, in 2010, some researchers actually discovered that speed in the Thoroughbred had probably come from a single Galloway mare. Right at the start of the stud book, we do have references to Galloways. One of my favourites is Cloudy, the Warlock Galloway, was owned by Captain Warlock, and eventually got into the stud of a chap called Cuthbert Routh in Yorkshire. And we know a fair bit about her because his stud records survived. So many stud records have not. But we know about Cloudy. She ran at Sedgefield. She was a successful racer. I think she was about 13 2-hands high. And a lot of the early horses in the stud book, Galloways, around about 14 hands. The Mixbury Galloway, 14 hands. Very, very, very fast horses. I should also say that when Henry VIII was in negotiations with the Gonzaga family of Mantua, his representative there, the court, said, I think this was around about the time of Anne Boleyn and all that going on, he said, the only thing that solaces my king's heart, King Henry's heart, is watching the little running horses and the Cavalli Corridori di Scotia, the running horses of Scotland, are the best horses, race horses on the island. Okay, so even back in Henry VIII's day, people recognised the importance of the running horse of Scotland. Scotland can really lay claim to the foundations of early thoroughbred racing and thoroughbred racing in general. It's a really highly developed sport on the border from the 1600s with handicaps and all sorts of things that we recognise now in thoroughbreds. But what's happened is it's been overlaid by this mythology of, have any of you heard of the three founding fathers? Yeah. Of the Bailey Turk was the first, then the Godolphin Arabian and the Darley Arabian. 3 stallions did not make a breed. In fact, I was on History Rage, which is a podcast last year, where academics, historians go to have a rage about things. And that's exactly what I was ranting about, this mythology that's come to overlay the Galloway story about the 3 founding fathers. Think about it, 3 fathers don't create a breed, do they? They just don't. Nobody was interested in the mares, they didn't record them, they didn't remember. But that's not quite true, they recorded some of them. But there's this idea that that's important in the thoroughbred came from these 3 stallions is actually incorrect. It's not correct at all. So the thoroughbred, Galloway can claim an important input into that. Now, being provocative, what I like to do is put an image of one of the Pictish riders on the laterally gated horse alongside a modern American breed, the saddlebred. Now, I'm just being a bit cheeky here, I have to say, but I don't think they're a million miles apart, really. And I do know that horses from Galloway influenced modern American breeds. The horse on the right, the saddlebred, is a gated horse, although it's not in showing gaited action in that particular picture. So I don't think it's too far-fetched to imagine that some of those genes filtered down into some of the American horse breeds as well. So one of the, I mean, I hope I've sort of impressed on you how important the Galloway was and how it's just kind of disappeared. And I have to, again, be provocative and say a lot of this is due to the whole Anglo-Scottish relationship and what gets promoted and what doesn't get promoted in that. The rise of the Thoroughbred was very tied into the rise of the Whig Party in England, and also the rise of the Jockey Club. And this was very much a Hanoverian thing. So their nice little mythology about the three founding fathers, and remember the Byerley Turk was said to be with Captain Byerley at the Battle of the Boyne on William III's side. This lovely little mythology ties very much into what's happening in politics as well. It's a totally political thing. It's absolutely political. I'm not the only person to note that. Professor Richard Nash has done quite a lot on the politics of early horse racing, and it's quite an eye-opening study. But so what I hope that people will take from this is the importance of Scotland in producing horses. It really, really mattered. And the Galloways were recognised as the best horses in Scotland, especially by the English. A good horse doesn't have to be big. These little ones that are more like Shelties, really like Shetlands, and there's definitely some genetic relationship between Shetlands and the Galloway. I'm not in any doubt about that either. Shetlands have the C gene for speed, by the way, as well, but the Oriental horses don't. The Arabians, the Barbs, Turks do not carry that gene. It's in the Shetlands though. A good horse doesn't have to be big. People didn't care about height. They cared about, or size. They cared about utility. Function mattered. And horse breeds change a lot over time as market priorities change. People want a particular type of horse and then they want something different, and this is in fashion and then it's out of fashion. And the gaited horses went out of fashion as people began to use coaches more, because you didn't need those comfortable riding horses any longer. You could just hop in a coach and go on long distances. So the gaited horses fell out of fashion. These are described as Yorkshire Galloways in Walker's costumes of the north of England, of Yorkshire. So you can see those are really much more like Shelties. But again, at this point, it's really hard to tell whether we're talking about the Galloway as a land race or whether it's an application of the Galloway as a generic term, or maybe a bit of a mix of both. But clearly, small utility animals still really important in the Industrial Revolution, even if they were not so popular for riding. Okay, I spent 6 years doing the PhD, and I am the first person to have done an academic study on the Galloway. It's never happened before. My book's coming out either the end of March, the beginning of April. And I hope that you can see that what I've done so far, and I'm still doing, is really just the beginning of this work. There's still a lot more to discover, and we need to look at estate documents, shipping documents. There's all sorts of areas that are very, very ripe for research in this topic, not just here in Scotland, but also in America and in Europe as well. So it's really very ripe. These are Galloway races, pony and Galloway races. The Galloway races were a popular event, only became unpopular with the rise of the Thoroughbred. And again, this is tied in very much to the Hanoverian, what the Hanoverians thought and what was good in a horse and wanted in a horse. But Galloway racing as a term continued into the 20th century. Everybody knew what it meant. It meant a little fast horse. That's exactly what it meant. So the understanding of what a Galloway was continued on racetracks. not the big prestige racetrack so much, but on the smaller ones, right into the last century, basically. Okay, now then, I think I've got to the stage where I can actually give you an impression of what I think a Galloway was like. I believe that the horse that's probably most like it today is the Icelandic horse. And this makes sense because the Norse were actually collecting horses in Ireland and Scotland. And then taking them back to Iceland, where they've been isolated for 1,000 years. So I'm pretty sure that when we look at an Icelandic horse, we're getting quite a good impression of what a Galloway was. The other horse that I like to mention at this point is the Irish Hobby. I suspect the Irish Hobby and the Galloway were probably closely related types, both gaited, both fast, both used for light horsemen in warfare, as well as in racing. Okay, so if I click this should now show. There we go. I'll point a few things out. Just watch this. This is absolutely brilliant. So the thing to notice here is how lightly he steps, how he picks his feet up beautifully. Again, little bay horse with black legs, clean black legs, not hairy. Okay. Then we'll shortly move into trot. Now, he's on the diagonal there. Can you see the legs on the same side coming together? But he's not a classic sort of trotter. The diagonal movement is much more noticeable in the majority of horses. But beautiful movement. Absolutely. And look at the length of stride. Speed is about all sorts of things, but it's not just about height or not just about being a tall horse. It's also about shoulder action, hip action, fetlock action, reach of stride. You know, you can really see that these horses move. They absolutely move, and I bet you could go. Now this is the lateral gait, one of the lateral gaits. He's going, he slows down again, you should be able to see that he goes 1-2 on one side and then 1-2 on the other. 1-2, 1-2, 1-2, 1-2, 1-2, 1-2. Yep, on the same side each time. 1-2, 1-2, 1-2, 1-2. Okay. This is a fast lateral gaited movement. The flying pace even faster. And look at the extension in those legs, the way the fetlocks can move. Oh, wow, here we go. You can see how in early times in Scotland, look how smoothly the rider sits. It's not moving at all. So you can see if you wanted to go somewhere in early times and you wanted to get there in a hurry, comfortably, a horse like that is going to get you there in a hurry very comfortably. And I reckon that's pretty much what our Galloways look like, very much what our Galloways look like. And I'm very grateful to the Icelandic Horse YouTube channel for letting us use that video. And you can go there and see lots more Icelandic horses in action. And I think that's probably, hopefully leaving you plenty of time for a few questions if you've got them. And hopefully having you whetted your appetite as to how important the Galloway Nag horse is.
Right, any questions? And just wait till the microphone reaches you if you have a question, so the folk in Zoom can hear